you were reporting it, they're creating a two-tier system. And it's a two-tier system whereby we have the too big to fails, the merger of state and corporate powers, which is called by definition, according to Mussolini, fascism, and then the rest of us.
We're going to be back with phone calls with you, Gerald Celente. Plus, I want to get your take on the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg saying, hey, let's hold off on this Chrysler deal, at least for now. I want to get your reaction to that. Well, next hour, Dr. Wayne Dyer, Dr. Bruce Lipton join us, a double dose of some heavy hitters. Up next, though, your phone calls with Trends Research Analyst Gerald Celente on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast, your phone calls, Gerald Celente. Gerald, what's your take on Supreme Court Justice Ruth Ginsburg slowing down this Chrysler deal?
Well, it may slow it down. It probably won't stop it, is the way we're viewing it. And by the way, this Fiat, that according to bankruptcy papers, the models that they're attempting to bring in and manufacture in the United States, if it does happen, these are two winner cars. And it may just be one of those things that they have this great car that could really boost this company, because Fiat, they were down on their back for a while themselves, and they put out these new models, the Fiat 500 and an Alpha model. I believe it's the 147 or 149, and they're real home run hitters. And by the way, I used to own a Fiat 124 Sports Spider, and they used to call Fiat in those days "Fix It Again, Tony."
Oh, yeah, those were the ones where the electrical was always screwed up. Remember that?
And the metal was paper thin. They used to rot out. And a beautiful looking car, but anyway, this might be a home run for Chrysler in a very strange way.
Interesting. Let's hope it works. Why aren't the foreign automobile dealerships, all of them, Toyota, Honda, Audi, Mercedes, all of them, Volkswagen, why aren't they in trouble?
Well, their sales are way off as well, and they're struggling. When you look at Honda, Toyota, all the ones you mentioned, their sales are off in
But
big
they're
numbers
not collapsing like GM and Chrysler
well,
apparently
they were
did.
building better automobiles. I mean, I have the quote here from Lutz. We did it now at Trends Journal. I believe it was in 2006, who was the vice chairman of General Motors, saying, paraphrasing what he said, was that if anyone thinks high gasoline prices are going to hurt SUV sales, they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, again, there's that quote attributed to Christ. I could heal the sick, make the blind see, the lame walk. I could even raise the dead, but I, not even I, could save a fool from their foolishness. I mean, people weren't buying GM and Chrysler cars because of what they are. Americans would have loved to have bought those cars. But who would buy them? What they were building. And everyone knows, George, everyone knows in the business that the reason they were building those monster cars was because they had high profit margins, and they couldn't find those same margins on building small fuel-efficient cars.
True. Let's go to the phones. Lamont, Pennsylvania. John on the wild card line. Take it away, John.
Good evening, George.
Hi.
Gerald. Nice to talk to you guys. Hey, I just had two quick questions. The first one was, Gerald, do you think this collapse happening in the last few months of the Bush administration was what he was trying to stave off in that last-minute attempt to get people's retirement or Social Security funds, change the laws so that they could invest their Social Security so-called savings in the markets? You think the administration was trying to keep this from happening while it was still on his watch, let it for the next guy?
Not really. That Social Security scam has been going on. I believe it began with Reagan. And when you look at it, John, Wall Street has hijacked Washington. You just look at who the Treasury secretaries are, one after another. You had Robert Rubin under the Clinton administration, a Goldman Sachs boy. I mentioned Henry Paulson, a Goldman Sachs boy. You look at John Snow, who was before Henry Paulson under Bush. He's now the chairman of Cerebus. That's the company that owns 50% of GMAC, that they made a bank overnight, and they also own Chrysler. And that's who we really bailed out. We bailed out a leveraged buyout company.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at it's that whole scam. The Wall Street gang is in control of Washington. So they'll try to get our money any way they can.
What's your next question, John?
Thinking maybe it was a last-ditch effort to get a little liquidity in there. The other question I had is just a very general macroeconomics question for someone who's terrible at macroeconomics. But what we're seeing now, is this pretty much this whole economic collapse on the largest level, kind of the consequences of having a debt-based society versus savings-based society? In other words, with savings, the few people around who've managed things well and have saved up money, they can keep spending for a while, even while things seem to be collapsing for so many others. Whereas people that are in debt, they lose $100 of their income and they have to stop spending $1,000 elsewhere, and that means someone else has to stop spending $10,000 because it just gets magnified because of their debts.
This is a global meltdown. If we're going to talk macro, on average, exports are off globally about 20% to 25%. That's enormous. When you see what's happening in different sectors of our society, let's begin with the elderly. Not even the elderly, people over 65. On average, I believe 39% of them only have $25,000 in financial assets. This meltdown is, as I said, it's global. England, the UK, they're underwater. They're now talking about re-rating their bonds. You look at Ireland. You look at Spain. Spain they're at 20% unemployment, about 18.9.
Jeez.
Latvia, Ukraine's GDP is off 23%. You cannot have a society like ours where we have 72% of our GDP is from consumption. You cannot consume 72% and not produce. This is a production problem. And what they've done is they've led us to believe that we could become a service sector society.
And we knew we couldn't do that.
We knew we couldn't do that. And that's the real problem. This is economics for dummies. And then what do they want to do? You hear the language. Listen closely to the language. We have to free up the credit market so banks could lend and people can borrow and go out and build that new house, buy that new house, and buy a new car. Well, how are you going to pay back this money? And you mentioned, George, about these young people that are graduating. Where are they going to get jobs?
I know it.
Where are they going to? You're going to get a college degree. You're lucky you get a job at Sports Authority.
Man, when do we go toward the Amero? Is that going to ever happen?
It may. And again, they're looking at global currencies. Something is going to have to happen. Again, today in the news, we were just talking about it earlier. Now it's moving over the wire again about how China is afraid of what's going on with the dollar. I mean, could you believe that they sent Timothy Geithner to negotiate with the Chinese? They chew this little guy up. And they love him at home. And, I love this, by the way. Read today's New York Times. There's a story about Larry Summers, the head of the Economic Council, the director of the President's Economic Council. And every time they mention Geithner, and again, you could Google this one up, they always have the name brilliant, the adjective brilliant. He's so brilliant. Yeah, this is the guy that destroyed the Glass-Steagall Act along with Robert Rubin under the Clinton years, that deregulated the banking industry, that allowed them to make all these bets and become casinos that gambled. He's the guy that allowed all these derivatives and toxic assets to be played on the markets. And he's brilliant. And then they go on to say how his refrigerator is filled with Diet Coke.